everything. All right, awesome. So I'm really excited that this is all working. Um, there are two people watching right now, so I will one person now. So I'm just gonna like chill and let people sign on. I'm not too worried about there being a ton of people because I understand like people are trying to get caught up um, these days. So I figured today could be a good like obviously there's a presentation to this because there are slides, but you know my thought for today is like let's make it a Q&A part because this is another one of those things where it's like what these are the mysterious parts of this activity. So again, this is one of the ones that doesn't just pertain to games for education. This is more of a broader lesson in the practice. I sound a bit echoey. Okay. So I'm on a new computer and I have an idea. I'll be right back. Click mouse. Okay, so, and then I'm going to audio input. Okay, is that better? Is no? Okay. There's not really anything else that I can do then. Because I just changed my mic, so. So, um, anyway, we'll soldier on. But, so, sounds better on mine now. Okay, that's good. So yeah, yeah, I'm on a new computer, so my setup might require a little bit of debugging, as it were. Is there a setting for? Okay, no. Unless I do that, no. All right. Okay. So we'll carry on with this for now, and then I can debug as needed later. But so first of all, I hope everybody had a good break, and hope people were able to get some rest. But so today what I thought we could talk about is again, it's one of the like mysterious parts of this field that is not necessarily something that pertains specifically to games for education, transformational games, and things like that. It's more a general practice question of, there's a version of this lecture that I've called You Made a Game, Now What? And really it's like, and this will apply to you. I know that you're still like working out some stuff with your games, but you're getting to the point where you have screenshots, you have assets, it's starting to really come together, and you have this thing now, and I know that like if you can, take a mental step back from your, the immediate needs of your class, I guess, like, which is this class, but of your classes and like the stress of this semester and things like that. And think about the work you've produced this semester. I want you to really think about the work you produced this semester, or even past semesters or potentially future semesters, and think about how these are now artifacts that exist in your, I guess, creative history, work history, however you want to phrase it, and are yours to use in a way that is productive and that will like hopefully advance you as a creative person. So that's something I want you to think about, and especially for these games that you've produced. Now, why these games in particular? I know not everybody is like super like into the educational game field, and some of you may be even thinking like, well, unless I get a job in this somehow, like, blah. But think about this. You've addressed difficult game design problems with external stakes, and you've produced something that has, screenshots, documentation, public presence, things like that. The reason I asked for these things is because, it's up on itch thing, and it's not, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's not just homework. It's something that you now have that you can use to promote yourself with or show your work. You have a functional game, and there are things you can do with that. So that's what today is about. It's about what do you do with these things once you produce them. Because, and especially for my classes, like when you do my classes, I want you to walk out with something that has a broader impact than, okay, you turned in your homework. I want you to be able to walk out with something that you can actually use as an asset for yourself. So what do we do with that? Well, part of this lecture is, so the topic is, like I said, you made a game, now what? And there's all these other things that we can talk about, like the ins and outs of how to do things. But I also want to hear from you in terms of what your questions about, again, like the parts of game development that aren't just like making the game. Because when you make a game, only a small part of making a game is actually making a game. There's a whole other part of making a game that is telling the world about your game. And it's something that schools don't do a great job of training, and this is why I do these lectures, is because I want you to, I can't give you the entire experience, especially this semester where we can't really see people. I can't give you the full experience of showcasing games to people or dealing with marketing and things like that, but I can at least tell you my experiences with it and have conversations about it and answer questions about it, so that like if you're ever in a situation where you have to deal with it, you're not blindsided by it. And I know some of you may be thinking, well, I want to work at a AAA studio, so I don't care. I don't want to deal with that. But, you've heard me say this before. Think about it this way. You're indie until you're hired by that AAA group, and what you can and should be doing until such a time where you are hired AAA, if you want to be a game developer, is really try to establish your presence through your work, whether that be establishing presence on social media. For example, like if you are interested in being a level designer, if you do some gray boxes that you like, and you make a video of them, like playing through them, or just some cool screenshots, you might post them on Twitter and share them with the hashtag level design. And like that's a really great community that's super positive and super friendly, and you know, love to hear from students and things like that. But that makes your work like visible by others and gets you joining the conversation. So a lot of this is about like, you made a game, now how do we use it to join the conversation? So in a big sense, we can talk about festivals, we can talk about running a booth, we can talk about merchandising, we can talk about different online marketplaces to post your stuff, and we can talk about social media. Okay, William is here. We can talk about social media and how to do social media without necessarily feeding trolls, which is a really important part of social media. Again, I want this to be a lot of Q&A. So what I'm going to say, there's 3 of you watching now. There have been kind of like 3 to 5 typically. But what I'd like you to do is post a question about, how do I want to phrase this? It'll be easier if it's more specific, but I want to capture a broad range of topics. I guess just post your questions about like what to do with game projects that you have, because like you have some at this point. You've taken multimedia and game design. You've taken, you know, where you make an app and a platformer. You've taken this class. Some of you may have worked on other side projects. Some of you are taking game prototyping, and that will be a venue for making games. You'll make 3 games in that class, in fact. So, you know, ask me some questions. I already got one. What is the best platform to showcase your work on? All of them, which sounds like a glib answer, but accessibility is really good. So if you are able to put your game on multiple marketplaces, that's usually the best. As a student, in terms of posting your game, I guess the best accessibility for you would be something like GameJolt, and I even use these for a lot of my games. GameJolt or itch.io, which is why I have you use them in my classes, because then haha, you have an account. I tricked you into doing a professional thing. Haha. But in all seriousness, like the reason that those are nice and accessible is that Itch especially is understood to be a industry relevant indie market. So, you know, it's kind of an accepted place to show stuff and to post things. So you see a lot of games that are on Itch and Steam at the same time. And the reason I'm not saying go to Steam immediately is that Steam requires additional setup items that you may or may not have be equipped to do yet. Such as like to join Steam, you have to have, you know, like a company bank account set up and be able to fill out a W-9. Now you can do that as yourself, but it's an extra step. Whereas with Itch, unless you are actually offering your games for a price, you don't have to worry about financial information. And then with Steam, every game you post costs $100 to post, which is like 8 million times better than the old greenlight process. I've greenlit a game before. It's awful, but confusing because they don't really tell you what the metric for getting your game greenlit was. But again, that's dead, so you don't need to worry about it. But, you know, Itch, you can just post. As long as, you know, again, it's not like offensive or something like that. Same with GameJolt. So as a student, before you really establish yourself as a business, Itch is really good. And again, is kind of an established thing. And it's used by a lot of professional developers, but it's also used by a lot of schools for this very purpose, to have you practice, you know, getting your work out there. So that's kind of my take on it in terms of, and other marketplaces like the Unreal, or not the Unreal, the Epic Store and things like that. Similar, you know, you got to pay or you got to, you know, get a dev kit or things like that. So that's kind of the landscape, is for where you are now, itch is really good. So that's why I require it. But thank you for asking that. That was an excellent question. Feel free to please ask me other ones or ask me throughout the lecture. But, so let's say you made a game. So you made a game. Now what? So you'll notice the image is from an indie game called Continue, blah, 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 blah. 987-654-3210 by Jason Oda, which is a game about a failed game character in a failed build, and the character is like waiting to be deleted from the creator's hard drive. So, you know, but we don't want that to happen to you. So what do you do with your game? So you've created a game, and, you know, congratulations, you've done it. You did a game. Yes. Give yourself a pat on the back. And I'm not being snarky with that. Like, making games is hard. People have asked me, like, what's easier, making a game or writing a book? And I will answer writing a book every time, because it's just me and Microsoft Word. And I am fully in charge of my own productivity. Whereas, like, I've made games like that, where it's just me and the thing. But, again, with me and Microsoft Word, I only really need to worry about writing. Whereas it's just a lot with a book. But for a game, it's like, well, today I've got to be a programmer. Today I've got to be a sound designer. Today I've got to be a marketer. Today I've got to be a artist, you know? So there's a lot, you know, making games is really hard. So that you've gotten to this point is really significant, and you should feel really good about that. And if you're like, well, but it's only my student game, yeah, you and a lot of people who have, you know, who have gone on to have jobs in the industry, they've made student games for assignments. So you're doing it. You've done it, or you're doing it, or you are in the process of doing it. And yes, enjoy that, first of all. So like, what do you do with it, though? So we've already covered free download like Itch or Game Jolt, and that doesn't have to be free. But, you know, again, it's kind of up to you based on your decision of like what the quality of it is, plus how much you feel like dealing with it to have like income for your game. There. Now, some games, some sites like, I know Game Jolt, I've made money on Game Jolt because you get some of the advertising revenue that comes from, like, if you have an online game or that goes from your page. It's not a lot, but like, holy cow, you know, $3. But, you know, that's a, hey, professional game developer. You know, if you've received money for game development, you are a professional game developer. So, you know, free downloads, they're great. You know, put stuff up there, establish a presence. And I mean, think about it this way. If somebody says, do you make games? You can throw them a link and be like, why, yes, I do. So, you know, free downloads are great. Don't discount them. But then there's also this thing, and it's called festivals. And festivals are interesting because they're a means for your peers, so other people in the industry. And remember, we talked about, like, you're in the industry. You might not think you are, but you are. You're just kind of like at the beginning of being in the industry, and that's normal. Everybody starts somewhere. So other members of the industry look at your game and decide whether or not to include it in a collection of games that people can see. Now, once upon a time, this happened in person at events, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, assuming that, like, you know, again, they happen again, which they will. You know, we all know they will. But the other thing is that festivals, we're in a weird time that, and I'm actually kind of crunching on a game right now to get it festival ready. But we're in a time where, you know, as much as all of this stinks, we're at a time where festivals can happen and you don't have to travel to them. Like, you know, there's one called, the one that I'm prepping for is called MagFest. And it's the Music and Gaming Festival. It's in National Harbor, Maryland. And I used to live really close to it. So it was like my hometown game festival, which was pretty great. But I haven't been able to go since I moved to Ohio because then I'd have to travel to DC and then find a place to stay either at the hotel that the festival takes place in, which is like massively expensive, or spend some time with friends from, that live nearby, which would be great. But then I also have to get to National Harbor, and unless I drive my car there, it's a whole thing. Logistics are a thing. But you can see that like logistics of traveling to a festival get complicated. But now there's no travel. So if there's an online festival, you're at a weird point where there's actually an enormous opportunity to get your game into stuff and not actually have to be there. So, take advantage of that right now. Just FYI. And we can talk about that. So, do you finish it? Now, I've explained this, and next semester, if you take game prototyping, I'm going to explain it again. It's really hard to make a game in 5 months, 3 months, 4 months, however long we end up having a game set, game making time in these classes, a month and a half for some. And that's okay. It doesn't like... The expectation for games in these classes is that they are games that look like they're made in 3, 4, 5 months, or games that are made in 48 hours or whatever. The expectation, like that, there's an element of realism to that. People expect that, especially with like student games. But you have this game. It's on your hard drive. You own it. And I trust me when I tell you, according to Kent State University, you own it. Which is pretty awesome. But, you can take that game if you like it and then maybe even keep working on it. It's your right to do so. And again, that is where maybe you like keep working on it. And then, you see a lot of student projects like this, like the indie game Octodad. It was a student game, and then they started a company and then continued working on it and then made a game called Octodad Dadliest Catch. Which is a really amazing game. If you've got Steam or a Switch or something like that, go check it out. But it's really funny. But like they finished the game and then became a company, and then the same company recently just released a game called Bugsnax. So that started them on becoming an actual like place to work for their student group. Which again, finish it, sell it for money. It's a thing you can do. It's your right to do so. Obviously, start a business and stuff. We could talk about that. This isn't a business class, but I can tell you some overall steps. Or, let's say you're just done. You don't want to do it anymore. You're like, this was an interesting experience. I learned a lot. But this isn't a game that I necessarily want to keep working on. Cool. Give yourself a postmortem, learn from your mistakes, and move on to the next thing. There's no shame in that. Because the thing, especially with games, is that, there is no... You're going to hear a lot about failed games. There's no such thing as a failed game, except a game that you don't learn from the experience of making. Most of my knowledge about game making comes from making games that, like, I've never launched. Because, that's where you make all your mistakes, and that's okay. So, it's okay to just put a game away and be like, I'm done with this. And that's fine. It's okay to stop. But there's no such thing as a failed game unless you didn't learn from it. So it's kind of also up to you to decide like what success looks like. Success for you may mean like, I want to get a job in a AAA company. Okay, do everything required of that. And then someday you might be geared up to do that, but you're like, oh, well, I don't want to do crunch because I've got, 3 kids now or something like that. And so then your priorities change and success changes for you. Success might just be like, hey, I get to work what I want to work on, and I have this other thing keeping a roof over my head elsewhere. Awesome. Success. So, the only unsuccessful thing is something that you don't reflect and learn from. And there are other people that are going to be like, oh, success is making a ton of money. That's a kind of success. Good for you. That is the success you want. So let's talk about festivals. So festivals are, what are they? Limited time events for showcasing the work of small and independent game developers. Now I'm focusing on indies here because AAA people don't really have festivals. They just have lots of marketing. And so, but you might be like, but what about E3? E3 is an expo. It's not really a festival. It has festivals within it, but E3 is like a professional trade show. And so is GDC, but within GDC is the IGF, Independent Games Festival. So festivals exist to showcase the work of, they're more like art festivals. So they're there to focus on the work of independent artists, and they're there to give people without $1 million marketing budgets to like the ability to like have visibility for their work. So that's what a festival is. So that's why it's indie focused. But again, you're indie until you're not. So, this applies to you. So you should think about, are there events that your game could work well at? Another thing to take advantage of in this time where you are a student is that a lot of these festivals offer student tracks for the purpose of helping people like you get exposure. Now, why are these student tracks beneficial to the other tracks? Well, again, it's like written into the understanding of these things that a student game is very different from a professional game. If you're joining an indie festival as a student, you're not competing with the people that formed their own company and made Bug Snacks, because they have like funding and developers who are experienced and have made a few games already, and things like that. The quality that they're reaching for is going to be a lot higher than necessarily what you have access to as a student. And that's not to say student games are bad. Many student games are super amazing and innovative. But, there is an understanding of like polish that goes into some of these. The other thing that's important about understanding these student tracks is that they're cheaper. Like submitting to, I think, this number might be out of date, but like the last time I looked, IGF was like $25 to submit as a student to, whereas like if I submitted to the IGF, it'd be $100. So think about those things when you look at these. As a student, you have, not only is there don't think of it as lower stakes. Think of it as understanding of realities of being a student developer, but also there is lower costs. So take advantage of that while you have it. So again, these often require money for entry, but not always. So check the requirements for them. For example, like Indiecade and IGF do, Boston Fig does. BitBash, I've had my work accepted to, I've had my work shown at BitBash events, but so it was requested, so I never had to pay for it. So I don't think there's a cost, but check. You might want to check. MIVs at MagFest, MagFest Indie Video Game Showcase, no cost to submit. And Smithsonian American Art Museum, no cost to submit. Same thing with GameFest Akron, which we just had. Which brings up a good point. Some of these may have their time frames have not occurred yet this year, or they just passed. It's okay. That's time for you to polish your game, to just hold on to it, to work on something else. But look at the submission windows for these, and you can see. But again, free ones include, like I said, check BitBash. I'm not sure, but MagFest and Sam Arcade and GameFest Akron with Akron Art Museum. Sam Arcade is Smithsonian American Art Museum. Those are all free. So yeah, look, some require money, some don't. And again, if there is money, there's usually a student fee so that you don't have to pay, the full price. You want to take screenshots of your game. Usually it's like 5 screenshots is good to have. And that's just a general thing anyway. 5 screenshots is very similar to what I want for your itch pages. Having screenshots of your game is helpful. Having a trailer or a gameplay video is helpful. So in terms of making a trailer, there are different types of trailers. And for example, you can do a trailer where it's just you playing the game for like a minute or something like that. And some people do that. That's kind of a quick and easy way of getting a trailer. The advantages of that is that you can show like just unbroken gameplay. And in fact, I know, for example, MIVs at MagFest, they require, or at least used to, I need to check the new criteria, but they in the times I've submitted, they require a video of your game functioning for 30 seconds so that they know that you're not like faking anything with video editing, which nobody ever does, as we all do. That's called making an E3 trailer. It's all fake. It's all smoke and mirrors at E3. But, the other way to do it is like to actually make a edited trailer where it's like quick cuts of video game footage, which, doesn't have that unbroken thing, but so is like technically more subject to video editing. But obviously the benefit of that is that you get a cool trailer that has like cuts and, is matched to the music, a piece of music and is more exciting and curated by you. So trailers are great. Take the time to always do them. Written description, again, it's like the stuff that goes on an itch page that I'd like to see by the end of the semester. Written description, usually a brief, write-up of the game, and I can share in the Discord my itch page for my card game Alancha, so that you can see like what this would look like all laid out. But again, written description, some short brief like this is what the game is about. This is who it's for. This is what its features are. That's helpful because again, this is how you essentially sell your game to people. And then the game demo, again, that's just a link to the game. So again, making that super accessible is good. But wait, so that's it. But wait, no, it's not. That's not it. Cool your jets. Here's the thing about festivals. Don't submit your game to everything because you want to. The thing about game making, and I've talked about this before, is like, my swimming story of like, well, there was that weird 3-week period where I was good at butterfly, and I think I told this to the animation group. Well, in high school, I was a swimmer. I was high school through college, and I was a freestyler, which means like front crawl stroke, and but for a weird 3 weeks, my senior year of high school, I was really good at butterfly, which is this one. And, it let me get, because freestyle is so popular and everybody does it, it's really hard to place at bigger meets because the field is just so packed. So when I, like that brief period where I was good at butterfly, I was able to place higher because it was a more specialized stroke. And the connection here is like, I've said this to people before, well, everybody and their mom wants to be a concept artist, but if you can do user interface art, you are more specialized and are going to find it easier to find work. Same thing with it is if you have like sound design skills or composition skills or technical art, so like rigging, all that stuff gives you a little bit of a leg up. Well, if you look at festivals, everybody wants to be part of the IGF and Indiecade. So it's really hard to stand out. there's also in some of those really established festivals like some drama regarding like who usually gets in. There are a lot of people who will say, and I agree with these, that they say they want new voices, but they always just let in the same folks. The reason for that is because, you know, what you get with these festivals is that you have maybe a group of people, like independent game developers, who were at one time a much smaller group within the industry. And they say to each other, well, we need to get recognition in the industry. And the way that we should do that is by maybe starting our own awards competition. And that will give us a means to, like, honor this type of game that is overlooked. And if that sounds like kind of insider tradey, that's usually how most festivals start, is that people say, like, there should be a place for people like me to go. So they start it. And then what happens is, in the case of IGF, it became so big and so centralized that they were eventually overwhelmed. And you see this like playing out with IndieCade too, is that the way that IndieCade works is very of the assumption that everybody's just kind of like around LA. So like, oh yeah, you know, we'll let you know like a week before that your game's been accepted, and it'll be fine because you're in LA. And it's like, you know, there have been groups that are like, but I'm in Australia actually, and I can't just hop a plane now. So you know, there's an element of like some of these places, they started out to be small, and they become the place that everybody goes to. I'm not saying don't apply to those. I'm just telling you like kind of what the scene looks like. So applying to those though, because they're so big, and because like again sometimes the organizers can be very overwhelmed, means that you know you're competing with a much bigger field. The other thing about these events is that if it is super big, you can't always depend on feedback. And that's another really important thing when you're starting out. It's not even necessarily that you're going to get into stuff, it's that you may or may not be able to get feedback on your game. So, like, IndieCade used to give feedback, and now they don't. Because they're, you know, the people judging the games, like, there's too many games coming in. So all this is to say, don't submit your game to everything, because not every event might be right for you. So look at the games typically featured by festivals. Is your game at the level of polish of other entries? So like IGF, IndieCade, and it sounds like I'm ragging on them, but I'm kind of using them as an example because they're the most recognizable. You know, those are the ones where if you are, you know, I'm trying, like if you're Hollow Knight or Cuphead, trying to like think of other super duper popular current, even though those are a few years old at this point, indie games that people are playing. You know, that's where you want to compete. Is at that stage. You know, if you're at that level. But if you're like a student starting out, well, again, you have a student track to be a part of, which, like, lucky. But, you know, if you're a person like me, and you have a game that's, like, starting to get there, I wouldn't put, you know, games I'm working on right now in those competitions at this moment, because they're not there quite yet. And I've submitted to those several times, and you know, have been like gotten to waitlist levels. So you know, you want to also think like, does the festival take the type of game you've made? So you know, is it like mostly everybody does digital games, like video games? But if you make a card game, do they take your game? Maybe not. So you want to, you know, ask, do you take tabletop games, and maybe then like apply to ones that would. So like Boston Festival of Indie Games takes tabletop games, or you know, Sam Arcade takes it because I make them. Game Fest Akron takes them because I make them. But I mean, they're cool with it. So you know, and then there's of course also one specifically catered to tabletop. So that's that's what you might you want to look up, like the type of games they'll take. Like, have you made an alt control game that is a custom controller? So maybe that is something to take into consideration. This also really applies to this class because you've made transformational games. That is a subgenre of games, and that has its own festivals, like Meaningful Play, which sadly is not going to run again until 2022. So hold on to these. But there's a festival that, like, I've been wanting to submit Kent State games since I showed at it in 2018. Again, unfortunately, COVID happened, but they've chosen to delay their festival. But that is a festival for transformational games. Others include Serious Play, which is the expensive one, which is unfortunate. There are things I'd like to explore to get us to be able to submit games to that, but I can't talk about anything yet. But that's another one. And then of course there's Games for Change in New York, which again, if you are able to submit to something like that, and especially in this era where maybe we don't have to travel, awesome. But that's transformational games is a genre of game that has its own group of festivals. I already mentioned this. Are you triple indie? So again, that goes into that, like, IGF Indiecade, or do you compete somewhere else? I would always tell a person to try to enter, if they have the money, Indiecade and IGF. Let me be clear. I've said a lot of things that make it sound like it's not worth it, but it is worth it from the standpoint of, if you've got a game, it's out there, it's done, go for it. You should go for it. The reason when I would tell you not to do it yet is if your game is not polished and finished. And reason for that also is one is because they are generally judging and accepting in their festival more polished games. The other reason is that when the game isn't done yet, you want feedback. So that is where you might go to the MIVS, Sam Arcade, Game Fest Akron, BitBash, more developer event, because those are ones that are going to be more friendly to sort of like in progress games, and those are great because then you can get feedback that you can actually enact. So again, feedback tend to be with newer, smaller festivals. Also, which is again great because then you are working with festivals that are healthy festivals for you to be a part of as somebody who wants feedback while your game's in development. And then the other thing to think about is, like, what kind of crowd do these attract? Because, and I can tell you some stories here. Well, let me see. That's actually a good segue to this, which is, so for years, living in the DC metro area, I would go to Artscape up in Baltimore, and Artscape was at the University of Baltimore's game program, like their facility, and what would happen was that, so Artscape is this arts festival that they basically like shut down a chunk of central Baltimore, and there's just like art vendors and museum pieces and live shows and performances and all this stuff all over the place. It's awesome. So the Gamescape part of it takes place again in this indoor area at University of Baltimore. And the thing with this is that it's because it's always in mid to late July. It's always like the hottest weekend of the year. I don't know what it is. The whoever's pulling the levers on weather in the Baltimore metro area always seems to make sure the temperature is cranked up for Artscape. Because what would happen is that you'd have all the families come in trying to get out of the heat and just wanting something for their kids to do for like 20 minutes. So what this would turn into is that it was all families, all kids, not necessarily gamers, not necessarily enthusiast audiences, just like, this was when I was working a lot on Dead Man's Trail, and a 4-year-old would walk up to my computer and just like start clicking on the game, and I'd be like, "Hey, buddy, does your mom let you play games like this with guns?" And then the kid would go like, "No," and then walk away. So at least they're honest. But the point being, if you want enthusiast feedback, or you want to build, if you want feedback on a game, or to build awareness to an enthusiast audience for your like kind of chewy strategy, resource management, game, a event that has mostly like a casual family audience might not be where you want to go. But like, and going to those events, we were like, oh my gosh, our game is so far behind, we're never going to finish this. And then we'd go to MagFest, where it's all gamers, and then people would get it. But on the flip side, like, you might be making a game where you want that audience. So, don't discount casual audiences and events. Maybe you're making kind of an artsy game. So you want art festivals. You want, the Sam Arcades, the Game Fest Akrons, and you want other things that are attached to other maybe art festival type events. So that's where you might want something. I actually had a developer thank me once for Sam Arcade, because they're like, my game had nowhere else to go. It was too weird it was too different for like these commercial game festivals. So like, thank you for making this. This place has a home. It's like, oh. So there's a logic to that. Sometimes, you're not necessarily maybe going to festivals, but maybe there's like a tech event or a meetup, right? Like, we've talked about this with networking. Maybe there's these, adjacent things like VR meetups or something that might also give you some other connections and that can help you network. There's also events that are like connected to gaming that might not be gaming events, like anime conventions, like Otakon. I have to work really hard not to say Otakon as a Metal Gear fan. But that was worse than my usual Snake impression, by the way. I'm sorry. Otakon. There we go. So like anime conventions, like Otakon, see? Or other things sometimes have gaming sections. So it's worth doing that. And again, you may or may not get the specialist audience there, but maybe they are a more up and coming part, and the person running it might just be like happy to get the submissions, which sounds again like you're dealing with lower stakes or standards, but that's an important thing to be a part of, is because like then what happens when it does get big and you do know the people and you're one of the inside people now, that sounds almost cynical, but this is part of joining a community. Really, the story of those established festivals that are hard to get into is that they were a community thing that blew up. And, so find your community. That's a legitimate part of networking and developing your career, is finding your community. Something that I've realized in my own like career is that you spend a lot of your career when you're younger trying to be part of this like other community and have them let you in, and you realize that community's a little impenetrable just because it's their peers who they did that like were young with. And then as you get older, you realize that the group of peers that you're trying to achieve with and you're doing like the young career development with just gets established by virtue of being around. And you may never join that group that's ahead of you, but you realize that they're ahead of you mainly by age, and then you're kind of occupying a similar point as they did when you were like the early career person. That made no sense. I'm sorry, but I guess it's like just be around is what this amounts to. Is like be around, participate in these things, and you'll eventually find yourself as like, oh, hey, I have experience. How'd that happen? The other thing to think about is esports. Oh well, STEM educational events. Sometimes, we did this. There was like a science museum in DC. There are science museums in this area that do stuff, but they want to have STEM or STEAM, like basically science, technology, engineering, and math. As much as we play up the art part in our program, you can be a part of these STEM events, and that'll help you get, again, showcasing and things like that. Esports, again, don't discount the connection you can possibly have by maybe glomming onto some esports events. They're super helpful too. Let me know if there are any questions. I'm going to move on to running a booth. Like I said, so this is weird because we're not at a time where people have booths, but I still want you to know about this because we will have booths someday. So what is a booth? It's a table or space prominently featuring your game's branding and a demo stations of your games from your studio or your current project. So here's me showing with some friends of mine at MagFest several years ago, my game Dead Man's Trail. And booths obviously help visibility because it's you and a bunch of branding and your game. Booths help sales insofar as like, people might like your game and then, hey, where is it available? And then you can give them a Steam key or the link to Steam or something like that. So that's helpful if your game's done, if you have your game on sale. This wasn't on sale, but, it helps visibility. So, you want to do that. Also, there might be press wandering around at some of these events, so that's good. Booths help you get feedback. If your game is not available for sale yet, it's not a wasted effort. Apart from like audience awareness, you get feedback on like, hey, so-and-so found a bug. We need to go fix that bug now. So feedback is really important when you're still in development. So what should you have at a booth? That's the big thing. What should you have? So I'm showing, this is a picture from Sam Arcade 2017. I think 2017. So what does this entail? So first of all, you should have 2 to 3 demo stations. So for example, here in this image, you have a guy who's got his laptop, and then you have some like other more built up demo stations. And obviously, like, the game was awesome and we accepted it. And thus, the laptop is not a like total strikeout. But when you are showing with a booth, to get the most out of your booth, if it is within your means, try to have 2 to 3 demo stations. And if you're working with a team, this is where this helps, because then people can bring their own laptops. So 2 to 3 demo stations is like generally best practice, because that way you can have like, there doesn't have to be a line for your game. Avoid bringing multiple games unless you have enough staff to run more than one. I have tried to show 2 games at one time. Never do it. The reason you never want to do it is that you want your ability to run the booth, especially if it's a several day event, to become kind of autopilot. And you do that only if you can like really give your spiel again and again and again. Trying to juggle 2 spiels and answer questions and guide people through using 2 games at one time is really hard. Don't do it. So again, unless you have like a partner or somebody that can run the other game, only bring one game. You can have multiple copies of one game, That's easy because you can be like, hey, everybody, I'm going to teach you how to play, and it's relevant to 2, 3 people, whatever. But if it's 2 games, you're splitting your attention, and that's going to make it not a great time for your audience. And that's really what this is about, is like making a good time for your audience. And then if you can, again, this isn't within everybody's means, but the slickest way to do this, if you have a digital game, is not a laptop. I'm touching my laptop, but it's better to not have a laptop, facing the audience, because it just reads a little worse. It's also like, in our heightened awareness of germs, it's a little more germy. Not that the alternative is not germy, but you're not dealing with germy as much. But the idea is, if you have an external monitor, have one monitor facing the audience member and the laptop facing you running the game. Duplicate those screens, because then you can watch the person play without like looking over their shoulder, and that lets you like observe play testing, again, without looking over their shoulder, so it's a little more organic. They control it with, like, if you have a USB keyboard or mouse, you can have like the audience member has their own mouse and keyboard. Again, keep the laptop on your side, so it looks more like a desktop on their side, and it's a little cleaner presentation. If you have tablets, plug them in, keep them plugged in, and buy a thing to lock it to the table. Don't just like have tablets free, because then somebody can be like, yoink. And then pro tip for multiplayer, if you have a multiplayer game, bring a TV. And I've seen people even like do the thing where they will buy a TV, leave all the packaging and labeling on during the show, and then go return the TV. I've seen people do that. But the idea is, like, if you're showing a multiplayer game, have a TV. And then if it's that way, people can watch your multiplayer game, and they'll be like, oh, what's this? Let's have a tournament. So yeah, that's just generally good practice. But again, that creates a nice clean environment. Again, and then yeah, have wipes. Obviously, like I said, we can't do all this right now, but when these start up again, these will be things you want to think about. And then have a trailer ready to run on a computer for downtime. So if like one of your stations is not being played at a time, don't just have the title screen rolling. Be able to like switch to VLC media player and like have the trailer queued up. Or if you want to be really slick about it, have the trailer set to auto run in your game as a demo mode. And put it into Unity and have some code that after X seconds of like no gameplay, it'll autoplay or something like that. The reason you want to do that is that gameplay footage and motion will attract an audience. If it's just your title screen, it will not attract anybody. So always have something of your game displaying on the screen if that screen is not being used. If you have a tabletop game, I haven't forgotten about you. Tabletop. Bring 1 or 2 copies of your game, or as many as your group can manage to play. When I'm showing, La Mancha by myself at a game store, it's me and the game, and I kind of like DM the game, even though it doesn't really require a DM. But I'll be one of the players, or if enough people walk in, I can let the players go, but I can, help them understand it. I can easily run 1 copy of my game. That expands if people kind of like get into it, or it's a bigger event, but usually 1 is fine. If you are at an event and you have some table space, again, bring 1 or 2, and again, if it's 2 copies of the same game, it's relatively simple to manage. Multiple games, don't do it. So same applies for tabletop. And again, more group members equals more people that can help you. Set up the game board between each game. Don't ever, when you're demoing a tabletop game, make the players do setup, because setup's always like the longest part the first time you play a game when you buy a game. So pre-set up the game, and when a team finishes, set the game back up into like ready to sit down and play the first turn immediately state. Always have the game ready to go. The other thing you should do when you're doing tabletop is, and the way you do this depends on the type of game you're making, is to choreograph each game. What I mean by that is, you never want them to, just as you never want them to do a setup, you never want the player to have to get a like fully randomized version of the game. The reason for that is if your game, so there's a game called Munchkin. I don't know if you've ever played Munchkin, but there's a game called Munchkin, and it's like Dungeons and Dragons, but a fun party game. And so it's like kind of loose. It's very funny, but the idea of the game is that you just like fight random monsters. And, so what this means, though, in gameplay is that it's possible that you could be like, all right, everybody, we're going to play a game of Munchkin. And then you draw the first card, and it's a monster card, and it's level 20 Cthulhu. And you've just started playing. So you're at level 1, and you have no gear with which to fight level 20 Cthulhu. So you're all going to die, right? And what this means is that, if you were a person visiting a booth at a convention and you thought this game looked cool, the game very possibly could have turned you off as a customer, depending on your personality. But assume like you're a person who'd be like, well, screw this game, I'm leaving. You lost a customer. You don't want that to happen. And it's not to say that you can't have that in your game. It exists in a very popular game, clearly. But you want to stack the deck if it's a card game, or maybe start in the middle of a certain scenario, or start as like, oh well, this character has gathered this many resources and this person is about to attack. Basically put the game in a state that allows a person sitting down to get the greatest hits and the best features. So for my game, La Mancha, it was a matter of like about 8 cards that I always put in a particular order. That's like, and now you'll see this part of the game. And now in the next, so it's like the first one showed the base gameplay, the second showed a different scenario, a third showed a different scenario, and then you'd see like X number before it would go to the battle phase, but then everybody would have been like geared up enough to beat the battle phase at that point. So it's really a matter of like making the game at its most predictable, but also like showing off its best features. So that's what I mean by like choreographing the game. Again, set that up between play sessions. Like I would literally take those cards out of the discard pile, put them into the right order, put them on top of the deck. Okay, so gonna try to finish this up quick. Things to do when you are running a booth. Physical items, again, within your price range. You might develop these over time. The first time you make a booth, you might be that person with the laptop. That's cool. It might be a few more times through this. You get your paycheck comes in, or you sell some copies or something, but then, so you can afford new stuff. So things I would recommend doing. Banner, 24 inches by 48 inches, vertical or horizontal, but you can see them around. You see the one for Soul in the background. That's a way to like, it's almost a flag saying, hey, come look at my booth, there's a game here. Banner stand, it works better if the banner is on a banner stand, as opposed to just like, flat or something. So you want the banner to be hung up. Most places will provide tables and chairs, but be careful. So, owning a table, like that's eventually you'll want to as an adult, you'll want to have picnics. So, having a fold-out table is a useful thing. Tablecloth. Always check whether it's provided by the convention or the event. Chairs on either side. So you want chairs for your audience to sit down. You want chairs for you to sit down. Those are usually provided by the event, but check. Alternate seating. Some people really like to make their booth be like a alternative type of space, like a living room or something. So you'll see, like, sometimes companies will set up beanbag chairs or something. That's not a requirement, but people do it. Just know that people do it in case you ever think it might be something you want to do. A lot of these events are run in drab. I'm saying this showing it next to, like, probably one of the more beautiful places that one can show a game. And I'm not saying that because I'm kissing up to the Smithsonian. I'm saying that because, like, a lot of developers are like, this is literally the nicest place I've ever shown a game in. It's like a courtyard atrium thing. But a lot of them are shown in very concrete and steel, flat, poorly lit convention halls. So sometimes, it's nice to have a rug. It's nice to just have, like, a rug you get at Target that might be a bright color. That could do a lot for your booth. In fact, MagFest requires it. So think about it, depending on where you're going. It's going to get a little gross, but, vacuum it or shampoo it between conventions or something. But a little throw rug is good. Miscellaneous items based on your game's identity or theme. So, for example, Art Club Challenge in the foreground here by Jared Huntley, who's a Cleveland area developer. He's the head of Cleveland Game Developers. His game is it's an art game. It's a game where you can draw pictures with shapes. And, he takes his computer screen and he put a frame with a mat around it because it's a piece of art. The game is a piece of art. So, he doesn't have to do something like that, but it adds a really nice extra touch. And that can be really nice to make your booth feel, like, nice and thematic. Is if there's something about your game that you can do to make your booth feel thematic, like, we're not at a point with Nemo where we can show it yet, but at a convention like this. But, like, it might be good to put up, like, Christmas lights or something that'll give it a starry night sky dreamland feel or something like that. The other thing you want to have is, like, if you have postcards about your games that somebody can walk away with, so that when they leave the convention, they're, like, emptying out their pockets, like, oh yeah, that game was cool. Postcards or business cards of your studio or game. Have them. Almost there. Merchandising. Bare minimum. Go to stickermule.com, get nice stickers, like vinyl-y stickers and buttons. Again, something to walk away with. Buttons are excellent because people will put them on their lanyard for their badge or on their backpack. So buttons are high desirability items. Stickers, people put them on their water bottle. I don't have my water bottle, but, like, you can see all the new stickers I put on my water bottle if I had it. That's a thing. On new computer, it is without stickers, and it's like, oh no, what's the first sticker I'm going to put on? These are important issues, and indie game developers answer them for us. Plushies. It costs money to have that made, but, if your Kickstarter makes it, thing to think about. Merchandising. 3D printed items. We have access to a 3D printer in our program, I've actually had students for game prototyping go get 3D printed stuff. And, like, I think I still have some of those keychains somewhere. I've also had people make their own stickers with, like, a sheet of sticker paper. That's cheaper. Your sticker will, like, fall apart the first time it's exposed to water, but, like, hey, you made a sticker. You're doing the thing. And then eventually you can get the Sticker Mule sticker. Awesome. Shirts. If you buy in bulk, they're cheaper. Again, budgeted into the Kickstarter. Tote bags. tote bags, like the first time I did tote bags instead of a t-shirt, it was like game changer. Those are more expensive than t-shirts, but they're really cool because then you can like carry your stuff around and advertise for your game at the same time. Soundtracks? A buddy of mine even had, you can do them on CDs. If people, I don't think people have CD players anymore, but you can do it. You can have cheap flash drives of your soundtrack or download codes for your soundtrack. Or I have a buddy who got his soundtrack put onto vinyl. You know, those are things you can do that people do as giveaways. And then, of course, your actual game, if it's available for purchase. You can sell the Steam code right there on a card. Also, I should mention, always ask the event if you're allowed to sell stuff at the booth. Some places you're not allowed to sell stuff based on the rules of the convention hall or the venue. Always ask. Never just roll up with like your Stripe reader ready to go, or your Square reader ready to go. Always check. But yeah, sometimes it's your actual game. Do you have cards with Steam keys? Do you have USB stick with extras on it? Or do you have your game in a box like I do? Get quotes from manufacturers and what their minimum... so when you ask for this, when you're researching this, what you do, because I know I was like saying a lot of different merchandise types, find a manufacturer, find out what the unit price of the thing is, minimum order that's required if you work with them, or do they do it on demand? On demand means like, hey, I need 5. You get 5. On demand is usually more expensive because they're doing it in small quantities, but, you know, useful. Again, confirm that the convention or space allows you to sell things in the first place. If they don't, then hey, guess what? You saved yourself having to lug in a bunch of plushies. But then if they do allow you to sell, cool. You know, you can sell your game. And then, of course, check sales tax laws of the state you're selling in. So if you go to a thing in Indiana, learn what your responsibility as a potential vendor is for paying sales tax in Indiana or wherever. Online markets. We've covered a lot of this, actually, so I'm going to just go through skip over it. And then social media, professional identity building. Make a studio logo, business card, social media accounts, and try to come up with a reason for being, which sounds silly, but somebody's going to be like, well, what kind of games do you make? And the thing you don't want to say is, I make the games that I want to play. Because guess what? Everybody does. And everybody says that. And it's a non-answer and nobody cares. But if you have an interesting reason that's like, I make games that I experiment with the art style to try to draw connections between games and established like media and art forms. That's my thing. You know, that it doesn't mean you can't also do that, but like that's different from I make what I want to play, which is more common. But it makes you more interesting. Marketplaces with audience feedback, Itch, Game Jolt, Steam, great. Social media plan. Always plan your social media out. Like try to have a day that you will post from your account. And I'm bad at this, but you know, do as I say, not as I do. And then, you know, try to be communicative. Like if audiences ask you like, why is your game different from this other game? They're not trying to trap you. They just want to actually know. So just be friendly. Don't be combative online. You know, have conversations. What audiences are mostly looking for is conversations. Beware of review code scams. If somebody says, I represent this website, write to the website and confirm. Either go on the website and confirm the email and be like, oh, that is a reporter from Eurogamer. Or if you don't see that person's name on the website, reach out to the general like inquiry line and be like, hey, does this person work for you? I've actually had people try to do that from that said they worked for Eurogamer, and I had to be like, hey, does this person work for you? And they didn't. They just wanted, you know, free codes. Don't delete negative feedback when you get it on Steam. It's mostly on Steam. And what'll happen is that the trolls and the gamer gators and the bad boogeymen will yell at you. So don't do it. Just leave it there and let the talk. Just know that toxic people are toxic, and that's not gonna like hurt your game in any way. But if you do delete the toxic stuff from bad actors, then you might get like negative review bombed. So it's an unfortunate thing we have to deal with, but there it is. And then maintain a limited time frame to manage any social media you have, because you need to get away, both to get work done and for sanity, because again, trolls. So, sorry that took so long. Any questions? Thank you for sticking around for the extra time. Like I said, I know that's a bad habit of mine, but hey, 4 of you who are here, you've got my undivided attention. What do you want to know? Well, while you're coming up with what you want to know, or catching up with the stream, I will tell you my story of the worst playtest ever. The worst playtest ever happened when I was actually showing Dead Man's Trail at Sam Arcade, because, as an organizer, I got to have an organizer table. Which I don't do anymore, because the one year that I showed Dead Man's Trail twice in a row at Sam Arcade, and I didn't feel right doing it for a third year, because I was like, well, we just like really formalized this rule where we're not going to do like repeat games anymore, because like we're getting enough inquiries from around the country, and we want to like make sure that there's no favoritism, so we're not going to allow repeats anymore. So I wanted to follow my own rules, so I didn't show my own game. Plus, it would feel weird to have the same game multiple times that much. So I'm not showing the game, and now they're like, Chris, you're not allowed to show games anymore because it's useful to have you around running around. But anyway, when I was showing Dead Man's Trail, this person walks up and they sit down to play, and I explain the game, and I say, okay, to shoot the zombies, you put the cursor over the zombie and you click on the zombie. And this person is clicking the mouse, should shut off the mouse, going like, I'm clicking, it's not shooting anything. The mouse was nowhere near a shootable object. They were just like clicking, and they didn't get that you had to point and click. And no matter what I did, no matter how I explained it, I couldn't get this person to get this concept of pointing and clicking onto the thing you want to shoot. And why this became the worst playtest ever is that this person also was hyper patient. So I made it sound like they were kind of being like, It was more like, it's not working. I'm sorry, I can't get it to go. What do you mean? Oh, okay, let me try. Okay. No, I think it's broken. It might be broken. I think it's broken. So they were super hyper patient, saying out loud they thought the game was broken. A bunch of people walked by being like, oh, that game looks cool, but it's broken. Let's move over there. And this went on for like 10 to 15 minutes. And finally, eventually, like, hey, sorry about it. Better luck next time, and then went away. And it was just like, it was this perfect storm of unable to compute the basic controls of the thing, plus, ultra patience so that they stayed there, plus thinking out loud so that people would think like I didn't get any residual audience members. And it just lasted forever. And I was like, wow, I'm gonna hope this all reboots. And it did in like 5 minutes. people started coming. But, yeah, that's the worst. So if I can survive that, you can survive people being like, oh, this isn't that good. Because truth be told, when you're at one of these events, nobody's going to run up to you unless they have, like, no social skills, whatever. They're not going to run up to you and be like, your game sucks, you suck. Unless they're, like, a bad person or having a excruciatingly bad day. Which in that case, it's not your fault. They're just venting to you, maybe. And sorry. I hope you're better tomorrow. But most people, if they don't like your game, will be like, hey, sorry, it's not my thing, but best of luck with it. That's what you're going to get if people are not into it. If people are into it, awesome. And most of the people that are going to stop are going to be into it. And sometimes people are going to be like, oh, cool, yeah, how do I get this game? Wait, you're the developer? Okay, yes, I'm buying it. They'll realize you're the person who's developing it, and then they'll buy it right there. Because they're like, oh, you're a person I can help. Great. So yeah, that's what most of my experience is like. There's no questions. Come on. Any questions? Well, okay. I'll tell one more quick story, and then if there's no questions, I'll free you. So the other quick story I have is not about game development. It's about being in architecture school. And we had a architecture project my junior year. This is the story of my worst critique ever. And the story is we had this project that was a scholars retreat on some new land that my school bought. And we found this was in DC. And that's really important. So like kind of the South-ish. So there's this big field of what we thought was ivy. And we were like, wow, that's so cool. Our entire group thought it was so neat that we all incorporated this giant field of what we thought was ivy into our designs. I had a porch extending over it, but other people made like mazes out of it, did all this like stuff, making it an essential part of their building, right? So I'm the first to present in my group to the assistant dean. And I give my spiel and I talk about it. And the assistant dean, who's a friend of mine still, by the way, looks at me, looks at my building, and he goes, Chris, that's kudzu. It's an invasive weed that grows at a rate of about 1 meter a night. And what it does is it overwhelms other plants, blocking out their sunlight and killing them. So I have to ask, you made this integral to your design. Is murder important to you? I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, like, what just happened? I look at my instructor, and he just goes, hey, we didn't know that, so could we just proceed? Because, like, people made mazes out of it. Could we just proceed as though it's just ivy, please? And that's when... Long story short, that's what my game Kudzu's about. That's why I'm making the game Kudzu, because I was like, oh, this is a game mechanic, eventually. Which, by the way, when I posted on Facebook, that assistant dean and that professor both liked my post. But, yeah. Again, that will never happen to you. That will likely never happen to you. You've got this. So... okay, so there's no questions. I'm available for questions on Discord. Like I said, that's it. I'm happy to make appointments, but that's the last lecture. Thank you for staying extra while I told my goofy stories about getting feedback on things. So, yeah, best of luck. Be safe. I look forward... The games look great, and I look forward to seeing them finalized. Bye.